My son Daniel stood in the center of his late father's study, a place that still smelled faintly of old books and the pipe tobacco Richard only smoked on Christmas Eve. It was a room of quiet contemplation and warm memories, but Daniel's energy was anything but quiet. It was a thrumming electric current of ambition that felt alien in this sacred space. He had unrolled a massive set of architectural blueprints across the antique mahogany desk, weighing the corners down with his father's old paperweights. "Mom, look at this," he said, his voice brimming with an excitement that chilled me to the bone. He gestured grandly at the intricate drawings. "The Phoenix Towers. It's not just a building, it's a statement, a legacy. We're talking a state-of-the-art, 50-story masterpiece that will redefine the city's skyline." He looked at me then, his eyes shining with a frightening fire. "This is it, my legacy project, and you, Mom, are the key." I must have looked confused, because he continued, his tone shifting to one of patient explanation, as if speaking to a child. "All we need to do is be smart with our assets. We sell this house. The property value in this neighborhood is sky high right now. We liquidate Dad's modest portfolio of stocks and bonds. You move into a beautiful new, much smaller condo downtown with a doorman and no garden to worry about. Your investment, your seed money, will be the foundation that makes me a titan of this city." He looked at me, his chest puffed with pride, genuinely expecting me to be swept up in his vision, to feel honored to play a part in his ascent. He had no idea that the modest portfolio he was so eager to cash in for his vanity project was a carefully managed collection of investments worth just over $19 million. And he had no idea that his father, my brilliant, loving Richard, had spent his last days on Earth warning me that this exact moment would come. "Hi everyone, I'm Grandma Evelyn. I'm 72 years old, and for the past year, ever since my husband took his last breath, I have been living a quiet lie in the suburbs of Chicago. To my son, I am a doting, slightly naive widow, managing a comfortable but modest inheritance. In reality, I am the silent guardian of a fortune, and the unwilling witness to a test my husband set from beyond the grave, a test of our son's character, which he is, at this very moment, failing with flying colors. This secret is the heaviest thing I have ever carried. Richard and I were married for 48 years, and we never kept anything from each other. But in the final, lucid weeks before the cancer took him, he made me make a promise that felt like a betrayal of the very son he loved so much. I remember sitting by his bedside, the sterile smell of the hospital room a stark contrast to the richness of our life together. His hand, once so strong and capable, was a frail, bony thing in mine. "Evie," he'd whispered, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. "We need to talk about Daniel and the money." "Richard, don't worry about that now," I'd said, smoothing his hair. "Everything is taken care of." "No," he insisted, a flicker of his old intense focus returning to his eyes. "You're not listening. I'm not worried about the money. I'm worried about what the money will do to our boy." Richard, you see, was a quiet genius. He was one of the original software engineers for a tech company that everyone now knows. When they went public decades ago, he became an incredibly wealthy man overnight. But we made a decision then. We decided we would never live like it. We didn't want to raise our son in a world of privilege and entitlement. We wanted him to be grounded, to be hungry for his own success, not for ours. So we stayed in our comfortable, but normal house. We drove sensible cars. We taught Daniel the value of hard work. "Has it, you know?" Richard rasped from his hospital bed. "He has my mind, my ambition. But he lacks my fear. He doesn't fear failure because he's never truly had to face it. He sees success as a birthright, a monument to be built in his name. This money, our money, it would be like gasoline on that fire, Evie. It would burn up everything good we tried to build in him. It won't bring him happiness, only a bigger, more ravenous appetite." "So what do I do, my love?" I asked, my heart breaking. "You protect yourself," he said, squeezing my hand with all his remaining strength. "And you protect him from himself. Let him think the portfolio is modest. A few $100,000 at most. Let him think the house is your only real asset. Let him build his own legacy, the hard way. If his character is true, he will do it without a second thought for your security. If it is not, you will know. And this money will be your shield. Promise me, Evie. Promise me you'll keep it secret until you know for sure. These are men. I promised. And for the last year, I have honored that promise. I have played the part of the modestly well-off widow, listening to my son's grand plans, my heart aching with the weight of my secret and the growing dread that my husband's prediction was coming true before my very eyes. This isn't a story about a son wanting to steal from his mother. It's more complicated, more heartbreaking than that. It's a story about a son who wants to gamble his mother's entire world on his own ambition because he has no idea what that world is truly worth. So, get comfortable. This is a story about a promise to a dying husband, a test of a son's soul, and the 19 million reasons I had to thank God I kept my mouth shut. Your support means everything, so please, give this video a like and subscribe to Grandmother's Soliloquy. The battle for my husband's legacy and my son's soul was just beginning. To understand my son's colossal ambition, you must first understand the man who spent a lifetime trying to temper it with humility, my Richard. He was a man of magnificent, beautiful contradictions. He was a certified genius, a man who could see the architecture of the digital world in his mind, but he couldn't ever figure out how to work our television remote. He was a multimillionaire who wore worn-out flannel shirts and found more joy in fixing a neighbor's leaky faucet than in attending a gala. He didn't just preach humility. He lived it, breathed it, and desperately tried to wrap our son in it like a protective blanket. I remember one Saturday, years ago, when Daniel was about 12. Richard had been invited to a prestigious charity golf tournament. It was a who's who of the city's elite, CEOs, surgeons, judges. It was a networking event disguised as a sport, a place Richard could have solidified his status as a major player. But that morning, our elderly neighbor, Mr. Henderson, a widower on a fixed income, was struggling to build a small deck on the back of his house so he could sit outside in the sun. Richard saw him from our kitchen window, saw the wood slipping, saw the frustration and exhaustion on the old man's face. Without a word, he put on his old work boots, walked next door, and spent the next 10 hours in the hot sun, sawing, hammering, and sweating alongside Mr. Henderson. They finished it just as the sun was setting. I brought them both lemonade. Mr. Henderson, his eyes wet with tears, tried to pay him. Richard just clapped him on the shoulder and said, "A good deck is better than a good golf score any day, Jim." That was my Richard. His foundation wasn't built on stock prices. It was built on kindness. Our life was a carefully curated world of normal. We lived in a lovely tree-lined suburb, but it wasn't a gated community. Our house was a comfortable 4-bedroom colonial, the kind where you raise a family and mark your children's height on a doorframe, not the kind featured in architecture magazines. We drove a Volvo station wagon for a decade because, as Richard always said, it's safe and it holds camping gear. What more do we need? Our vacations weren't to Paris or Rome. They were 2 weeks every August at a rustic cabin on a lake in Wisconsin. A place with a screened-in porch, the smell of pine needles, and the sound of loons calling across the water at dusk. It was there that Richard taught Daniel how to fish, how to build a fire, how to identify the constellations. He tried to teach him that the greatest riches in life had nothing to do with money. Daniel, even as a boy, was different. He was a wonderful child, bright and charming, but he was born with a fire in his belly that we never quite knew how to handle. He didn't just want to win, he needed to. I remember him playing chess with his father. Richard was a brilliant player, but he would sometimes make a deliberate mistake to let Daniel win, to encourage him. But Daniel, even at age 10, would have none of it. Once, he saw Richard make an obvious error, and he swept the pieces off the board in a fit of rage. "Don't let me win," he shouted. "Beat me. I want to beat you." It wasn't about the joy of playing the game. It was about the glory of the victory. That intensity, that hunger to conquer, It both thrilled and terrified us. We saw it again and again as he grew up. He had to be the class president, the valedictorian, the captain of the debate team. He worked incredibly hard and we were proud of him, but we worried. We saw that he measured his self-worth not by his effort or his integrity, but by his titles, by the applause. After college, he went into real estate development, and he was a natural. He had his father's strategic mind, but none of his caution. He saw buildings not as homes for people, but as monuments to his own vision. He quickly became successful, with a beautiful wife, 2 lovely children of his own, and a lifestyle that was far more extravagant than the one had been raised in. We watched, from our quiet little world, as he built his own. A world of country clubs, European cars, and a relentless, exhausting climb up the social and financial ladder. After Richard was diagnosed, Daniel's ambition took on a new, unsettling focus. It was no longer just about his own projects. It was about his father's legacy. His grief, which I know was genuine, became tangled up in it. He would sit by his father's bedside, not talking about memories, but about the future. "Dad, we should endow a wing at the university in your name," he'd say. "Or a foundation. We have to make sure the Miller name means something for generations to come." Richard would just smile weakly and squeeze my hand. He was trying to tell his son that his name already meant something. It meant love, kindness, integrity. But Daniel couldn't see that. He only saw brick and mortar, marble plaques, and public acclaim. In the first few months after Richard passed, Daniel's behavior was a model of filial devotion. He handled the funeral arrangements with quiet efficiency. He checked on me every day. But slowly, subtly, the conversations began to shift. His questions turned from, "How are you feeling, Mom?" to, "Have you spoken to the financial advisor, Mom?" His concern morphed into a form of management. He started talking about the house as an underutilized asset and Dad's portfolio as lazy money. He saw my quiet life of grief and memory as a problem to be solved, a pile of resources waiting to be properly leveraged for his own grand designs. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head every time he looked around his childhood home. He wasn't seeing memories. He was seeing capital. And I was the gentle, aging, unsuspecting gatekeeper who would, out of love and trust, surely hand him the keys. The blueprints lay sprawled across my husband's desk like a conquering army's battle map, the stark white lines and sharp angles, a brutalist assault on the warm, book-lined coziness of the room. My son's words still hung in the air, thick with ambition, and a terrifying casual disregard for my entire life. "Your investment, your seed money, will be the foundation." He wasn't asking me. He was informing me of my new purpose. I was no longer a mother, a wife, a woman with her own history. I was an asset to be leveraged. I took a slow breath, the scent of old paper and Richard's pipe tobacco filling my lungs, grounding me. I needed to be careful. My first response would set the tone for the entire war to come. A hot, angry no would make me seem emotional, irrational. It would play directly into the narrative he was already constructing in his head, that of a sentimental old woman who couldn't see the bigger picture. "Daniel, darling," I began, my voice a soft, gentle thing, a cashmere blanket thrown over a block of ice. It's a magnificent building. Truly, your vision is breathtaking." I walked over to the desk, running a hand over the smooth, cool paper. I let him bask in the praise for a moment, let his proud smile bloom. "But sweetheart, sell the house? My home? I don't think I can do that." His smile didn't vanish, but it tightened at the edges. The brilliant shine in his eyes was replaced by a look of patient, weary condescension. It was the look a parent gives a child who refuses to eat their vegetables. "Mom, I know this is hard," he said, his voice softening into a placating purr. "I know you have memories here, but we have to think logically, not just emotionally. This house is a sleeping giant. It's an investment, just sitting here." Dad would have understood. He was a brilliant man. He would have seen the financial sense in this. The casual invocation of his father's name, used to justify the very thing his father had feared, was a sharp, physical pain. It was like he had taken a precious memory and melted it down for scrap metal. My husband's ghost stood beside me, his voice a clear, cold whisper in my ear. He sees success as a birthright, a monument to be built in his name. Your father loved this house, I said, my voice still quiet, betraying none of the fury coiling in my stomach. He loved the garden. He loved the quiet. And he would have loved to see his son build the future of this city. Daniel's voice rose slightly, a note of frustration creeping in. Mom, this isn't about a garden. This is about legacy, our legacy. The Miller legacy. He took my hands in his grip firm, proprietary. Don't you want to be a part of that? Don't you want to help me achieve something great? The question was a masterpiece of manipulation. It framed my refusal not as an act of self-preservation, but as an act of selfishness, a denial of his ambition. It was designed to make me feel small, guilty, and obstructive. I gently pulled my hands away. I need some time to think, Daniel. It's a very big decision. He sighed, a long, theatrical sound of a visionary burdened by the small-minded. Of course, Mom. Take your time. Just don't take too long. The investors I'm courting won't wait forever. That was the first skirmish. In the weeks that followed, the campaign intensified. My quiet, unassuming home became a staging ground for my son's ambitions. He didn't come alone anymore. He started bringing his allies, a team of smiling sharks who circled me, smelling blood in the water. The first was the real estate agent, a woman named Tiffany, who was all sharp angles and a predatory smile. She walked through my home, not as a guest, but as an appraiser, her eyes flicking over everything, calculating its worth. She didn't see the worn spot on the rug where Richard and I used to dance. She saw hardwood floors waiting to be refinished. She didn't see the sunny breakfast nook where I'd read stories to a young Daniel. She saw a tear-down opportunity. Margaret, you were sitting on a gold mine, she gushed, her voice echoing too loudly in the quiet living room. An absolute gold mine. In this market, we could start the bidding at $3 million, easy. We'd have offers pouring in before the E4 sale sign was even in the ground. You could be living a life of luxury, unburdened by all this maintenance. She waved a dismissive, manicured hand at the room, at my life. I played my part. I was the slightly dazed, overwhelmed widow. Oh my, I'd say, clutching my chest in mock surprise. $3 million. I had no idea. Inside, I was cold with rage. My home, my sanctuary, was being discussed like a side of beef at a butcher's auction. Next came the financial planner, a slick young man named Chad, who was one of Daniel's country club friends. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Richard had taught Daniel how to do long division, and he spoke to me in a rapid-fire torrent of jargon designed to confuse and intimidate. He talked about leveraging assets, unlocking potential, and aggressive growth strategies. He spread out glossy charts and graphs that showed my modest portfolio, the one I knew was worth $19 million, as a sad, sleepy little fund that was practically losing money by the day. Evelyn, he said, leaning in conspiratorially, his cologne overpowering the scent of the roses I'd cut from the garden that morning. Your current portfolio is far too conservative for a woman in your position. It's lazy money. We need to get that capital working for you. Working for the family. If we liquidate these low-yield bonds and reinvest in Daniel's Phoenix Towers project, the projected return is, well, it's astronomical. Yan. I would nod slowly, my brow furrowed as if in deep, confused thought. It all sounds so complicated, I'd murmur. I could feel Daniel's impatience radiating from across the table. He was embarrassed by his simple-minded mother, who couldn't grasp these basic financial concepts. He had no idea I understood every single word. I understood that leveraging my assets meant stripping me of my security. I understood that unlocking my potential meant locking me into his plan. I understood that astronomical returns meant he was willing to gamble my entire world on the foundation of his ego. My inner world during this time was a lonely, windswept place. I would sit in Richard's study at night, the house silent around me, and I would talk to him. I would tell him about my day, about the smiling sharks and the condescending pats on the hand. I would tell him how much I missed his quiet strength, his unwavering moral compass. "You were right, my love," I'd whisper into the darkness. "You were right about everything. The hunger. I can see it in his eyes. It's frightening." The guilt was a constant, physical ache. I was lying to my own son, the child I had nursed through fevers and celebrated at graduations. Every time I played the part of the naive widow, I felt a piece of my own integrity chip away. Was I doing the right thing? Was I protecting him? Or was I just being a coward, afraid of the confrontation? But then I would remember the promise I made to Richard, the desperate, fierce love in his eyes as he made me swear it. This wasn't just about money. It was about honor. It was about protecting the values Richard had lived and died for. And so, I held the line. When the direct assault failed, Daniel shifted to emotional warfare. The next Sunday, he didn't bring a shark. He brought his children. My grandchildren. Lily, who was 10, and Noah, who was 7. They burst into the house, full of life and laughter, and for a few hours, I could almost forget the war we were in. I made them cookies, we played hide and seek in the garden, and I felt the familiar, beautiful ache of a grandmother's love. But it was all part of the strategy. Later, as the children played on the living room floor, Daniel sat beside me on the sofa. He put his arm around me, a gesture that once would have felt like love, but now felt like a lead weight. "Mom," he said, his voice low and sincere. "Look at them. They're amazing, aren't they?" "No. They're my whole world," I said, and it was the truest thing I had ever said. "I want to give them everything," he continued, his gaze fixed on his children. "The best schools, trips to Europe, a future without limits. The Phoenix Towers, it's not just for me, it's for them. It's the foundation of their future. A legacy that will set them up for life." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Don't you want that for them? Don't you want to help me give them the world?" And there it was. The emotional checkmate. He was using my love for my grandchildren as a weapon against me. He was asking me to choose between my promise to my dead husband and the future of these beautiful, innocent children playing at my feet. It was the cruelest move he had made yet. My heart felt like it was being torn in two. But through the pain, Richard's voice was a steady anchor. "He lacks my fear. He sees success as a birthright." Richard hadn't built his legacy with money. He had built it with character. He had given Daniel the tools to succeed on his own. What Daniel was asking for wasn't a foundation for his children. It was a shortcut for himself. "Daniel," I said, my voice trembling with the effort of keeping it steady, "the greatest gift we can give them is the one your father gave you. The value of hard work. The pride of building something for yourself. They have a wonderful father who can teach them that." Daniel's arm dropped from my shoulder. The warmth in his expression vanished, replaced by a cold, hard frustration. The mask was slipping. "So that's a no then," he said, his voice flat. "You'd rather sit here in this museum, surrounded by old furniture, than invest in your own grandchildren's future. I don't understand you, Mom. I really don't." "It's not about the furniture, Daniel," I said softly. "It's about your father." "Dad," he scoffed, and the sound was like a slap. Dad was brilliant, but he played small. He was content with this quiet little life. He could have owned this city, but he didn't have the nerve. I'm not going to make that same mistake. I'm going to build something that matters, something people will remember. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was the ultimate betrayal. He wasn't just dismissing my life, my home, my security. He was dismissing his father. He was calling Richard's humility a weakness, his integrity a lack of nerve. He was twisting the very essence of the man we both loved into a cautionary tale, a mistake to be avoided. In that moment, the last vestiges of my guilt vanished, burned away by a clean, righteous anger. The test was over. My son, my brilliant, ambitious, beautiful boy, had failed. He had failed his father. He had failed himself. And he had no idea that the woman he had just called small and selfish was the only thing standing between his ravenous ambition and a $19 million tank of gasoline. The time for playing defense was over. It was time to build a fortress. The sound of my son scoffing at his father's legacy was the sound of a key turning in a lock I didn't even know existed. It unlocked a part of me that had been dormant for 50 years, a part that had been softened by love and a peaceful life, but was forged from something much harder. Before I was Richard's wife, before I was Daniel's mother, I was Evelyn Hayes, a girl who had grown up with nothing and had learned to fight for everything. That girl, I realized, had not disappeared. She had just been sleeping, and my son had just thrown a bucket of ice water on her face. I didn't say another word. I simply stood up, the plate of half-eaten cookies still on the coffee table, the sound of my grandchildren's laughter still echoing from the other room, and I looked at my son. I looked at him with the eyes of a stranger. The warm maternal love that had always been there was gone, replaced by a cold, clear, and utterly unflinching assessment. He was no longer my child. He was an opponent. "It's getting late, Daniel," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. "You should take the children home." My tone, so flat and final, startled him. He looked at me, a flicker of confusion in his eyes, but the arrogance won out. He shrugged, a gesture of a man dismissing a lost cause. "Fine, Mom," he said, standing up. "Think about what I said. Think about what's really important." He gathered his children, who ran to hug me goodbye. I hugged them back, my arms tight around their small bodies, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I was not just protecting my money from their father. I was protecting their future from the man he was becoming. As I watched his expensive German car pull out of my driveway, I made a silent vow. He wanted to build a legacy? Fine, Dachway. I would make sure he inherited his father's true legacy, the consequences of his own choices. The moment the door closed, the performance ended. The frail, sentimental widow vanished. I walked with a straight back and a firm step into Richard's study. I sat at his desk, the desk where my son had so brazenly laid out his plans to dismantle my life, and I began to build my fortress. My first call was not to a lawyer. It was to a man named Arthur Vance. Arthur had been Richard's best friend since college, and his silent partner in all his early business ventures. He was a ruthless, brilliant, and fiercely loyal corporate lawyer who had retired years ago to a life of fly fishing and bourbon. He was also the executor of Richard's will and the only other person on earth who knew the true extent of our wealth. He answered on the second ring, his voice a gravelly boom. "Evelyn, to what do I owe the pleasure? Don't tell me you finally decided to sell that old house and travel the world like I told you to." "Arthur," I said, my voice steady, "I need your help. Richard was right about Daniel." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and the jovial tone in his voice vanished, replaced by the sharp, focused edge I remembered from decades ago. "Tell me everything," he said. I did. I told him about the blueprints, the real estate agent, the financial planner, the emotional manipulation with the grandchildren. And I told him Daniel's final, damning words about his father's lack of nerve. I spoke without tears, my voice a cold, clear recitation of the facts. When I was finished, the silence on the line was profound. "That arrogant, ungrateful little," Arthur began, his voice seething with a rage that mirrored my own. He took a deep breath. "Okay, Evie. Listen to me. The boy is playing checkers, but we're about to play chess. Richard and I put contingencies in place for this. Ironclad ones. Your assets are more protected than you know. But protection isn't enough. You need to teach the boy a lesson he will never forget. A lesson in humility. A lesson in fear. Marius. What do I do, Arthur?" "You do nothing. Yet," he commanded. "You continue to play your part. Be the confused, sentimental mother. Seem like you're wavering. Let him think he's winning. I, on the other hand, am coming out of retirement. I'm going to find you the sharpest, most terrifying litigator in this city. Not for a fight, but for a performance. We're not going to sue him. We're going to educate. 2 days later, Arthur introduced me to a woman named Diana Sterling. She was everything Arthur had promised: tall, impeccably dressed, with eyes that seemed to see right through you, and a mind that moved like a high-speed train. She wasn't warm or comforting. She was a weapon, and she was going to be my weapon. We sat in her stark, modern conference room high above the city, and I laid out the story again. She listened, her face an unreadable mask, her fingers steepled before her. "So, the objective is not to disinherit the son," she said when I finished, her voice crisp. "The objective is to dismantle his arrogance and force him to confront the character of his own ambition, an elegant problem." She smiled, a thin, dangerous curve of her lips. "I like elegant problems. They require elegant solutions." And then, the plan we devised was a masterpiece of psychological warfare, worthy of Arthur's cunning and Diana's killer instinct. It was a trap, but not a simple one. It was a labyrinth, designed to lead Daniel deeper and deeper into his own greed, until he was so lost he would have no choice but to face the monster in the center, himself. The first step was for me to lay the bait. I waited a week of agonizing silence where I ignored Daniel's calls and texts, letting his frustration and impatience build. Then, I called him. My voice was soft, hesitant, the voice of a woman who had been worn down. "Daniel, honey," I whispered. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the future, about the grandchildren." I heard him take a sharp breath, sensing victory. "Mom," he said, his voice instantly warm, magnanimous. "I knew you'd see it my way. I knew you'd want to be a part of this." I think so," I said, letting my voice tremble. "But I spoke to Arthur Vance, just to get some advice. He reminded me of something in your father's will. A condition." "A condition?" The warmth in his voice cooled slightly. "What kind of condition?" Here it was. The heart of the trap died. "It's about the house, Daniel," I said, feigning confusion. "Arthur says your father was very specific. The house cannot be sold while I am alive. It's to be my residence for the remainder of my life. But he said there's another clause. An investment clause." "Go on," Daniel said, his voice tight with focus. "The will states," I lied, the words Diana had so carefully scripted for me flowing smoothly, "that if a major, family-led investment opportunity arises, one that has the potential to significantly increase the value of the Miller estate for future generations, then the estate's liquid assets, the portfolio. But only, and this is the part I don't quite understand, only if I agree to move into a suitable managed care facility first. Arthur said it was your father's way of making sure I was, safe and looked after, if the family's money was tied up in a big project." I let the lie hang in the air. It was a work of genius. It took Daniel's own desire to get me out of the house and get his hands on the money, and twisted it into a prerequisite. It made his greedy goal seem like a fulfillment of his father's wishes. And it presented him with a clear choice: his monument or my comfort in my own home. The silence on the other end of the phone was so long, I thought he might have hung up. I could almost hear the frantic calculations, the weighing of options. The prize was so close he could taste it. All he had to do was convince his confused mother to move into a nursing home. "Mom," he finally said, his voice thick with a false, manufactured emotion. "Mom, that's incredible. It's a sign. It's like Dad is giving us his blessing from heaven. He understood. He knew we had to build for the future." He was practically weeping with joy. "A managed care facility. Of course. It's perfect. It's what I've been saying all along. You'll be safe, you'll be comfortable, and we'll be honoring Dad's wishes. We can start looking for a place for you tomorrow." Why? He had taken the bait. He had swallowed the hook, the line, and the sinker. The next phase began immediately. Daniel, now believing he was acting on his father's posthumous instructions, became a whirlwind of activity. He arrived at my house not with real estate agents, but with glossy brochures for the most luxurious, eye-wateringly expensive retirement communities in the country. "Only the best for you, Mom," he'd declare, spreading them out on the dining room table. "Dad would have wanted you to have a 5-star experience." He was no longer trying to get rid of me. He was trying to warehouse me in style. He took me on tours of places with chandeliers, private chefs, and on-site cinemas. He would point out the state-of-the-art nursing stations and the 24-hour security. His sales pitch, a perfect blend of loving concern and ruthless efficiency. "Look, Mom, you'll be so safe here," he'd say, while his eyes darted around, already seeing the dollar signs, already picturing the first 50 stories of his Phoenix Towers. I played my part. I was hesitant, frail, easily impressed. I would marvel at the amenities and fret about the cost. "Oh, Daniel, it's so lovely, but it must be so expensive." "Don't you worry about a thing, Mom," he'd say, patting my hand. "The estate can handle it. This is an investment in our future. In their future." He would gesture vaguely towards an imaginary portrait of his children. It was a sickening, surreal performance. I walked through gilded cages, nodding and smiling, while my heart felt like a block of lead. I was an actress in the final act of a tragedy he was writing, and the stage was being set for the final, devastating scene. He thought he was leading me to my new home. He had no idea I was leading him to his judgment day. The day of the final meeting was a masterfully orchestrated piece of theater. Diana Sterling had booked the largest, most intimidating conference room in her law firm's downtown office. It was a cavern of mahogany and leather, with a view that spanned the entire city skyline, a view that included the very spot where Daniel dreamed of building his Phoenix Towers. It was a room designed to make people feel small. I arrived early with Arthur. I was dressed simply, in a gray dress that made me look elegant but also somber, the grieving widow. Arthur, on the other hand, looked like a lion ready for a hunt, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his eyes sharp and alert. Diana joined us, a vision of corporate power. We were the silent, waiting tribunal. Daniel arrived precisely on time, bustling with an energy of self-importance. He was not there for a discussion. He was there for a coronation. He strode in, kissed my cheek with a patronizing air, and shook Arthur's hand with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. "Arthur, good to see you," he said. "Glad you could be here to witness the beginning of the new Miller legacy." He barely glanced at Diana, dismissing her as just another lawyer. He unrolled his blueprints, his ever-present blueprints, across the vast conference table, a declaration of his intent to conquer this room, this city, this family. "All right," he said, clapping his hands together. "Let's get this done. I've found the perfect place for Mom, the Azure Gardens. It's top of the line. She's agreed to move in at the end of the month. So Diana, I assume you have the paperwork ready for me to sign to release the estate's funds into my project's holding company?" Diana Sterling let the silence stretch. She let Daniel's arrogance hang in the air, a foul odor. Then she smiled that thin, dangerous smile. "No, Daniel," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "I don't have that paperwork, because that is not what is going to happen today." Daniel's smile faltered. "I'm sorry, what are you talking about? We have an agreement. It's in my father's will." "Ah, the will," Diana said, nodding slowly. She slid a single crisp document across the polished table. It was a certified copy of Richard's actual will. "Why don't you read it? Not the version your mother paraphrased for you. The real thing." Daniel snatched the paper, his brow furrowed with irritation. I watched him as he read. I watched the confident smirk on his face slowly, painfully, begin to curdle. I saw his eyes scan the pages, faster and faster, searching for the clauses I had invented, the conditions he had so eagerly met. I saw the moment he realized they weren't there. There was no clause about an investment opportunity. There was no condition about me moving into a managed care facility. There was only one, simple, ironclad provision regarding the house: that it was to remain my primary residence, untouched and unsold, for as long as I live. He looked up from the paper, his face a mask of confusion and dawning fury. What is this? This isn't what you told me, Mom. You lied to me. Did I? Yes, Daniel, I said, my voice quiet, but as solid as granite. I did. I lied to you because you have been lying to me, and to yourself for the past year. That's ridiculous, he sputtered, his face turning red. I have done nothing but try to secure this family's future, to build something great. No, Arthur Vance's voice boomed from the head of the table, making Daniel jump. You have done nothing but try to secure your future. You have done nothing but try to build a monument to yourself. You dismissed your father's life as plain small. You saw your grieving mother not as a person to be comforted, but as an obstacle to be managed and an asset to be liquidated. You, son, are a disgrace to your father's name. Daniel stared at Arthur, speechless, the blood draining from his face. He was cornered, his arrogance deflating like a punctured balloon. But Diana wasn't finished. This was not a simple execution. It was a meticulous dissection. The lies your mother told you, Daniel, she continued, her voice clinical, were a diagnostic tool. A test, if you will. A test to see if your ambition was tempered by any shred of familial duty, love, or simple human decency. For the prize of a modest inheritance, you were willing to put your mother into a home and gamble her security. You didn't just fail the test. You obliterated it. Doc? She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Daniel looked around the room, from Arthur's thunderous face to Diana's cold, impassive one, and finally, to me. He looked at me, his mother, and for the first time, I think he saw the stranger he had been treating me as. But the most important lesson for you today, Daniel, Diana said, her voice dropping to an almost conversational tone, is about information. You made all your plans based on incomplete, false information. You assumed the estate was modest. You assumed your mother was naive. She opened a thick, leather-bound folder that had been sitting in front of her. Let's correct that assumption, shall we? She began to speak. She didn't use jargon or complicated charts. She spoke in plain, simple English, detailing the true nature of the Miller estate. She listed the major technology stocks, the blue-chip holdings, the vast real estate investments Richard had made over 40 years. She spoke of dividends, of capital gains, of trusts set up for the grandchildren that he could not touch. With every word, another brick was laid in the fortress of my financial independence. With every sentence, the foundation of Daniel's fantasy world crumbled further into dust. She saved the final number for last. She looked Daniel directly in the eye. Ace of the markets closed yesterday. Your mother's personal, liquid net worth, separate from this house and all other trusts, is $19,274,000 and 63 cents. Dead silence. The number just hung there. It was an impossible, incomprehensible figure. It was a nuclear bomb that vaporized the entire landscape of his reality. His Phoenix Towers, his legacy, his grand vision. It was all revealed for what it was. A child's sandcastle next to an ocean of real wealth. The wealth he had dismissed. The man he had called small had built an empire, and he had been too blind, too arrogant to even see it. I watched my son. I watched every ounce of color drain from his face. I watched his bravado, his ambition, his entire sense of self collapse inward like a dying star. He didn't look at the blueprints. He didn't look at the lawyers. He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw not just shock, not just shame, but a profound, soul-shattering, horrifying clarity. He finally understood. He understood the test. He understood the depth of his father's wisdom and the terrifying scale of his own greed. He saw the man he had become, reflected in the light of $19 million, and the image destroyed him. He slowly, carefully, sank into one of the expensive leather chairs, put his head in his hands, and for the first time in his adult life, he began to weep. Not tears of frustration or anger, but tears of a broken, humbled man. The aftermath was quiet. There were no more grand pronouncements, no more battles. The war was over. Daniel's divorce from his own ambition was a messy and painful one. He had to face his investors, the ones he had courted with promises built on a fantasy, and admit his failure. His grand project, the Phoenix Towers, collapsed before a single shovel of dirt was ever moved. It was a public, humiliating defeat, and it was the best thing that ever could have happened to him. He didn't speak to me for 3 months. I gave him his space. I knew he was not just processing his humiliation. He was mourning the man he thought he was. He was rebuilding himself from the ground up, without the false scaffolding of arrogance and entitlement. He showed up on my doorstep one Sunday afternoon, unannounced. He was thinner, his eyes were tired, but the frantic, hungry fire in was gone. In its place was a quiet, hesitant light. He didn't bring apologies or excuses. He brought a small, potted rose bush. "It's a Mr. Lincoln," he said, his voice quiet, like the ones Dad used to grow. We spent the afternoon in the garden, together, in silence, planting the rosebush next to his father's old ones, our hands in the same soil. When we were done, he turned to me, his eyes clear for the first time in years. "I get it now, Mom," he said. His legacy, it wasn't about what he could build. It was about what he chose not to build. It was about this: the garden, the quiet, the choice to be a good man instead of a great one. I'm so sorry it took me so long to see it. That was the beginning. The beginning of a new relationship, one built not on assumptions or ambitions, but on a difficult, painful, and ultimately cleansing truth. The $19 million remained my shield, but it also became a tool. I didn't fund his new projects. Instead, I funded his children's education, completely and irrevocably. I set up a foundation in Richard's name, one that funds trade school scholarships and apprenticeships for young people who want to build things with their hands, the way Richard believed was honorable. Daniel started his own company again, from scratch, a small one. He designs and builds beautiful, modest, single-family homes. The kind people raise families in. The kind where you mark your children's height on a doorframe. He is building his own legacy now, one shovelful of humility at a time. He is becoming the man his father always knew he could be. So what is the lesson from my secret? It is that a parent's greatest responsibility is not to pave the road for their children, but to give them a good map and the strength to navigate the journey themselves. Richard knew that giving Daniel a paved road would only lead him to drive recklessly. He had to let him face the mud, the potholes, the difficult terrain, to learn the value of the destination. I also learned that wealth isn't a blessing. It's a magnifying glass. It makes small flaws into grotesque deformities and small virtues into shining strengths. It revealed the flaw in my son, but it also eventually revealed his strength, the ability to change, to be humbled, to rebuild. And my advice to you is this: look at the foundations, not just of buildings, but of people. Is a person's life built on a solid foundation of integrity, humility, and kindness? Or is it a glittering facade built on the shifting sands of ambition and ego? The answer to that question will tell you everything you need to know. Do not be dazzled by the height of the tower someone promises to build. Pay attention to the quality of the ground they are building it on. Your own peace of mind, your own security, that is the only ground you can ever truly trust. Thank you for sitting with me today, for allowing me to share this very personal story of a promise kept and a son reclaimed. It is a heavy story, but one that ends in hope. If it has resonated with you, I would be so grateful for your like and your subscription to Grandmother's Soliloquy. Your support is a quiet comfort. Remember to be wise builders in your own lives. Build with the strong materials of character and love. Those are the only legacies that truly last. I'll see you in the next story. Love, Grandma Evelyn.